Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. You're watching on YouTube, like button, subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. It's always much appreciated. And while you're there, you can check out Between the Hashes. That's my son Matthew's quick but informative look at the big college football games of the weekend. Just look for that every Friday. You can also check out, now that the hockey season's underway, the All's Caps podcast, and that's with Carl Alsner, former Washington Capital, and Steve Wino, the national AP hockey writer. That's All's Caps, ALZ Caps. Check it out. Today, I'm joined by ESPN Stephen Holder, who covers the Indianapolis Colts. Going to take a look at the Colts, starting quarterback Sam Ehlinger, but also what went wrong with Carson Wentz there. Were there other teams involved in a possible trade for Wentz? And what was going on with Jim Irsay's comments about Washington owner Dan Snyder? Why does he think that Irsay made those comments? We're going to look into all that. And listen, every time Washington wins, these games become a little bit bigger because if you win, you inch your way back into a certain spot. So you need to learn about the opposition. This is a Colts team that has had some issues very similar to what's been going on in Washington with the teams in general. It's kind of amazing. And Stephen and I talk about all that. But again, give me a minute and we'll get to that. First, I'm going to kind of fill you in on some other things that happened out at Washington's practice today at the Commander's facility. Number one, Chase Young did not practice today. So you probably already knew that by now, but they decided they want to have him see Dr. Andrews one more time. So now it looks like it'll be next week. I don't think there was any my understanding is there's no sort of setback. I think they're being really, really cautious with this one. And just for people to know, like the way they can measure the strength in the knee, and compared to, they have the baseline from where it was before he was hurt, and they'll compare it to his other knee to make sure it's right where it needs to be. So that way one leg isn't being where they're not favoring one leg over the other, et cetera. So they measure that kind of stuff. So that's, I don't know how much that's going into what's going in now, but I do know my point is they have certain metrics and baselines that they hit and can measure against to determine where he is. So anyways, but the key is they're not rushing him back, and there you go. So I would say you'll see the doctor again. If all goes well, practice next week. There you go. Well, today it was a lot about Taylor Heinicke and Terry McLaurin. McLaurin is going back to his hometown of Indianapolis, where he grew up and played football. And it's funny because he's had a hell of a journey since then. I mean, here's a guy that was not offered a scholarship right away to Ohio State, had to go prove that he was worthy of one. Gets drafted in the third round, becomes one of the highest paid receivers in the game. And now he's going back to play in his hometown. Still a big dude there. He's got 70. He said he's going to have about 70 family and friends just who bought tickets for this game. He bought most of those tickets. He said this was the year to happen. He goes, after what happened this summer, he could afford this one. So still a big check. I don't know how many times they'll do that, but he's doing it this time because there are a lot of people that he's the kind of guy who wants to pay back to people who meant something to him. And this is one way that he feels he can do that. And so he will do that. And he grew up a huge Colts fan. They would go to every game up until he was probably in high school. And they sat in section, I think it was 540, pretty good seats. But he was a huge fan. And he was a big-time fan of former Colts receiver Marvin Harrison. And they both kind of have this understated game. And I think there are some similarities in terms of that. And he said he did meet Harrison. It's one of the few. I think he said it's the only. It made it sound like there would be two people he was starstruck by. One of them is Harrison. Not sure the other. So, but the one was definitely Harrison. And the funny thing is, Marvin Harrison's kid is playing at Ohio State, so Terry got to know him going there and getting to know him now, and et cetera. But anyway, so it's a big deal for him. And he talked more about how what it means for him for McLaurin to trust him as much as he does. Anyway, then there was McLaurin and Heinicke, and this whole story with Heinicke remains the every guy type demeanor that he has, and the way he just kind of walks through the locker room, and he's a regular dude in there. And I think guys really appreciate that. And I was talking to a few players about that today. and talking to one about how if you just watch the film, just the coach's film, do you feel like, can you get the same sense of him as if you're there in the huddle on the field with him, on the sidelines with him, in the stadium with him, where you can feel a different sort of energy versus just watching a robotic breakdown of a guy where you don't, you can see the strengths and the weaknesses, but do you feel the impact of a guy? And that's one of the things where players will say he's got this it factor. And someone told me when I asked him about that, describing that kind of scenario, coach's film versus be on the field, he goes, that's the it factor. You don't know it until you're there, and it's like he's got it. Now, it doesn't mean that he's the greatest quarterback. It just means that's what draws, as one other player told me, that's one of the things that attracts them to Heineke is that. And as Charles Leno said, what did he say? It's not pretty, it's gritty. And that's very true. Because there are going to be times you're going to, after a game, it's like, that was horrible. But then there are other times where you win a game like they did the other day, and it's like, well, why is that? And they credited his grit as a big reason for that. And I, like I said, I think it doesn't mean guys think he's the greatest player in the world. I think they understand the situation. They understand, and even Tress Way was saying like Taylor knows that Carson's a starter, but guys do like him and they do like playing with him, and I think they enjoy watching him out on the field. So there you go. The other thing in the locker room today that was kind of fun, and it's why it's important for us to be in a locker room to get to know guys. So at the end of the locker room, it's not always just going up to guys and just like, why are you guys great? Why are you guys bad? Why are this? It's getting to know them. So we had a conversation with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. And for 10 minutes, it was about best chicken places, Chick-fil-A, Popeyes. Then they started talking about Raising Cane's and biscuits from, Bojangles, which I love the biscuits from Bojangles. Good. But so we were talking about that. We're talking about some places in Alabama because that's where Brian Robinson's from. But the big thing for those two was Waffle House. And they bemoaned the fact that there are no Waffle Houses in Northern Virginia, or especially in Ashburn. So, and there's some that are about 45 minutes away. They both agreed they're not driving more than 5 minutes to go to one, but they both wish they had them. So, but it's just a little exchange, but it gets the guys comfortable with us and it gets us to know them in a different way. That's the value. Those are the little conversations. Those are nothing kind of conversations, but it's how you develop relationships. And it's why it's important that we are back in there this year. And I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed being back in a locker room, getting to know guys, getting to talk to guys about various things, because most of my conversations are really not about football anymore. You have them when you need them, but you're really just trying to get to know players after not being in the locker room for 2 years. So there you go. The last thing is Sam Cosmi. He was practiced full today. By the way, Logan Thomas was limited in practice. Jahan Dotson was not out there. We did not see him on the practice field. And Cole Holcomb has a foot issue, so he wasn't out there either. Sadiq Charles was not out there. He was sick. Logan Thomas did go, again, was limited. And if I had to guess, I think he's going to play. That's a guess. And I'd heard good things about Dotson, but let's see how that one progresses, because at this time last week, he was going to play on Sunday, but he didn't. So let's see how that progresses. I'm not going to speculate right now because I don't know. But I know with Cosmi was a full participant in practice, but he's got the club on his left hand. The one thing he said that it does do is it forces him to use his feet more, because he can't rely on grabbing a guy. He's got to have perfect positioning. That means perfect footwork, or really, really good footwork, in order to put himself in the best position. The other thing is with that club, he still has a hard time grabbing. He still can't grab. So when you're a tackle, you've got to grab inside those pads. And sometimes it's hard if you can't do it. So until he can do that, I think the other thing is that he's not sure when that club is coming off. And part of it is he's got to be really careful with that injury, because it could, if he's not careful, it could get a lot worse. So they've got to make sure that he can grab and play with it. But again, one of the benefits, he said, is that it has improved his footwork. So there you go. Anyway, that's it from me. Now, let's get to my conversation with ESPN's Stephen Holder. By the way, you can follow him on Twitter at Holder Stephen, Stephen. There you go. And again, we dive into all the Carson Wentz stuff. I asked him, were other teams interested in trading for him? He'll give you his answer. Stephen, and before we came on here, you said it. And we're going to go there because these teams, you and I cover teams that have a lot in common. And it's funny because there was a stat on Frank Reich and how many quarterbacks he's had over since he's been there. I'm like, well, Ron Rivera's had 7 now starting quarterbacks in Israel. I think it's the same for Reich, right? 7, and since
It
he's been
is.
there.
Yeah, 7 starting quarterbacks.
So instead of Wentz versus Ryan, we're getting Ellinger versus Taylor Heineke. So first of all, let's fill us in on Sam Ellinger. And you wrote a story on the hows and whys of the whole Ryan situation that's up on ESPN.com. But fill us in on Ellinger. Why are they turning to him?
Well, the first thing is that Matt Ryan's injury opened the door to this. That's the first thing. And I know what they're saying, but it is hard to envision that they do this without Ryan suffering that shoulder injury, which, by the way, is very real. I saw him in the locker room after the game, and you could tell like he's not right. He was in a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, very obvious. So let's just get that out there. I guess we'll never know, but I think it's harder to envision it happening without the injury opening the door. So now we're here. Sam Ellinger is a really interesting player. We don't have anything to base it on from the regular season because he's really only taken, I believe, 18 snaps, most of which were taking a knee, running a read option, and fourth down. So he's not really played any extensive snaps that you can draw anything from. But his preseason and training camp experience is enough to at least demonstrate that there's something there. He is very athletic. He's a smart runner. He has a good feel for the game. His throwing and his accuracy has actually greatly improved since he's gotten to the NFL. Because if you watched him in college and even his rookie year in the preseason, it wasn't very impressive. And I just didn't think he had an NFL caliber arm. He, to his credit, has worked with Tom House, the throwing guru, of the past year or so. And I saw a really clear difference in the preseason and in training camp. Is it enough? I don't know. And he certainly doesn't have any experience, but it at least puts him in the conversation to be a viable NFL quarterback. And so the Colts here, they got to lean into his running ability, his ability to throw on the run, extend plays. It may not be perfect, okay? And it may look a little sandlot at times, but that's somewhat their advantage this week. So we'll see.
And you kind of pretty much just described Taylor Heineke as well. And he too worked on his arm strength. And the problem is if you can't step into the throws, the arm strength, then it's like the old arm shows up. Because like I know with House and all those guys, you got to get your hips into it. You got to get the weight transfer and all that. If you can't step into it, it's out the window. But Heineke does provide a spark here. Can Ellinger, because of what you just said, and because they have not been a good offense, can he provide that kind of a spark for them?
I think where he has a chance to be a spark, at least initially, until defenses adjust, where he has a chance to be the spark is one of their biggest issues right now has been just the offensive line just not holding up. So when you have an immobile quarterback like Matt Ryan, and frankly, Nick Foles too, who's on the roster, and they're bypassing Nick Foles. If you played Nick Foles, you'd have the same issue behind the current offensive line. They just can't hold up. So where Sam Ellinger gives you a potential shot in the arm is he can maybe evade some of the pass rush that Matt Ryan just can't. And I think after week after week of being hit, it really took a toll, I think, on Matt Ryan, not just the shoulder in itself, but just I think mentally as well. Quarterbacks, there's sort of a psychological effect to all of that. And I think it speeds you up. It impacts your accuracy, all of those things. I mean, if you've been watching football for a while, you can see it, right? So that was happening to Matt Ryan. Now, Sam Ellinger is better equipped to deal with that. So that's what they have to kind of hang their hat on, and we'll see how far it can take him. But I think that has a potential to be a shot in the arm.
Everything you said is exactly what I said about Heineke last week. Everything. So anybody listening is like, wait a minute, stop us if you've heard this one before. So it's amazing how similar, because like you go from an immobile quarterback behind a line that's not protecting them, and you have a run game that's not working, but you needed to get it working, etc. So like there's all that. And then I guess the other part is how much of a factor was Ursay in this decision?
Yeah, but before I go on, maybe we're just trying to talk ourselves into this stuff, right?
I think
That's what
so.
this is.
Maybe.
So I do think Irsay, it's pretty clear, in fact, that Jim Irsay, their owner, was a big variable here. There's been a lot of Irsay talk, I guess, among Washington fans
Yeah,
lately.
we'll get to
So
that in a minute.
yeah. So anyhow, very happy to talk about that. That was pretty interesting. Anyway, he clearly has played a role in this, and Jim Irsay kind of has this reputation for being outspoken, you know, obviously, but I will say in his defense, he generally lets his people operate, unfettered. And, when it comes to football matters, he really doesn't interfere that much. He wants to stay, updated on what's happening and get the explanations. He wants to hear it all. He is a football guy. He was once the GM of the team many years ago. So his football knowledge is very legitimate, but he doesn't tend to influence decisions. I don't think that's the case here. And that's because a couple of things, in my estimation. This team has kind of been floundering when it comes to quarterback for a long time. And at some point, that gets tired. I think we're at that point. We're at that point a long time ago, frankly. And then the other thing is, I think he understands, even though they're 3-3-1 right now, which is a very, viable position to be in the AFC, which is kind of watered down right now. He understands that, the fan base is restless and there's a business component to this. You got 10 games to go. People are not very optimistic about, how the team could come out of this. Their 3-3-1 record, frankly, has come in spite of their offense, not because of it. So I think in the long term, you worry about, whether the lack of offense could impact fan interest. The other component, I should say, one other one is we haven't seen Sam Ehlinger in this kind of scenario. We've always seen him in the preseason. And so this is a team that is clearly going to have to make some quarterback decisions in the very near future. Is he going to be the guy? I mean, history says no. Okay, a sixth-round pick is probably not going to be the guy. But they probably at least need to know. And so this gives them at least that opportunity.
Have they even, like, when you hear talk to people, where, like, for example, Heineke, what I always heard would be high-end backup, low-end starter. That they felt was his ceiling. Have you got a sense about them with Ehlinger, about even before this, what they felt he would project to?
Yeah, my sense is that, and some people have even stated this outright to me. My sense is that they viewed him as a backup, and possibly a very good long-term backup. I'm not saying this because he went to Texas, but he puts me in the mind of Colt McCoy. I think they have very similar games, and I see the Heineke comparisons too. I think that's accurate. And I think, Colt McCoy is a very viable backup quarterback, for a long time in the NFL. When he became a starter, it was a little hit and miss, right? So, but I think that's ideally what you want in a backup, a guy who's smart, who can play, at the drop of a hat, if called upon, who has leadership capacity. He has all that, talking about Sam Ehlinger. So that makes him an ideal backup, which in today's game, that's a critical spot, right? I mean, I think if you look at what the Cowboys have been able to do, right? Just having a quarterback who didn't have to lead the way, but someone who could keep the team afloat. So there's value in that, and I think they saw that as pretty good value for Sam Ehlinger. And if he became more than that, great. But I don't think they were projecting it necessarily. But we'll see.
How much do you think this then changes? Because you wrote a story about this, I think, a week or two ago, about them becoming maybe a more pass-heavy team. They have Jonathan Taylor now, and you do have some young receivers. You got a young receiver core that's interesting. But do you think this goes back to more of a Jonathan Taylor show?
Well, yeah, I think that story really becomes invalidated now because this changes everything.
Right.
So and honestly, the thinking there wasn't like, oh, Matt Ryan's so good, we have to throw the ball. It was two things. Number one, they aren't generating the kind of rushing offense they have in the past, which is mystifying, but it is what it is. So they haven't been able to do that. partly because of the offensive line. The other thing is, they have probably relied too much on the running game the last couple of years and didn't have enough explosiveness in their offense. And they have been struggling and wrestling with that. So Frank Reich has talked about needing to have more big passing plays, for example. So anyhow, here we are now. That kind of goes out the window because now you just kind of have to wing it a little bit, and figure out what you're going to be. We don't know. I actually do think their running game could be positively affected potentially by this. On the one hand, I worry about defenses crowding the line of scrimmage and forcing Ellinger to throw the ball, which negatively affects your running game. On the other hand, because he can get to the perimeter and do some things on the move, even as a thrower or passer, maybe that spreads you out a little bit too. So it depends on how they attack it, and we'll see. They have to be creative and they have to be very precise. But I think there are scenarios where they can kind of get their running game going, by making this move.
Is it just the O-line that's struggling with the run game? Is that the big problem?
It has been. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, he's been out a couple of weeks, just came back this past game. But prior to his ankle injury, he had been getting hit behind the line of scrimmage quite a bit. I mean, we looked at his numbers, for time till contact, or I forget the exact term of the stat, but basically yards before contact, I should say. And it was the lowest of his career. It wasn't good at all. And so, while he is very good at running through contact, look, if you're getting hit in the backfield, that's just a game changer. Yeah. So, and even he, as great as he is, just hasn't been able to overcome it. I'll say this: he did have a few more lanes last Sunday, and he looked better as well too. So maybe he's turning a corner. We'll see.
A couple more topics. Start with Carson Wentz. Did not, we endured the Wentz experience in the 6 games he played. So, any surprise at what transpired? And it's not to blame. Just like in Indianapolis, you can't it wasn't all Wentz's fault, but some things magnify the flaws. So, any surprise by what went on here so far with Carson Wentz?
No, I think with Carson, the thing that you just have to understand going in is that the range of outcomes is going to run the gamut. It's going to have a lot of highs. It's going to have a lot of lows, and sometimes they're in the same game. And that's what's so mystifying about him is that, you see sometimes, plays that are just flat out highlights. And you're like, man, that's the guy I remember, and you saw it in the NFC East. You've been seeing it for a long time. And then there are also plays where you're like, okay, that's why he is where he is. And I don't know how you reconcile that. It's just a really hard thing to really make sense of. And I think sometimes, what coaches really want ideally from their quarterback is, they want dynamic play, of course, but failing that, they want, consistent play, predictable outcomes, right? And Carson's highs and lows, you're never getting a static result there. And that's what's been, I think, tough for fans of both the Colts and the Commanders, to deal with Carson. But, look, it wasn't all his fault. You are correct. I think that for the Colts, despite what Jim Irsay said, I'll tell you from the organization's standpoint, everybody else, the book or their viewpoint, I guess, on Carson Wentz was, look, they didn't hate the guy. They didn't blame it all on him per se. I think they just realized that, for their quarterback issue, he wasn't going to be the answer in the long term. So they decided to turn the page. Matt Ryan's not the answer either, but that's a totally separate matter. I think they realized he wasn't the guy. They decided to move on.
Why? And it may be obvious why, but why do you think they decided that? And I would say this here, the hard part that I've had here is that they built an offensive line that struggles to protect up the middle. He's a guy who needs that protection up the middle. So it's a bad mix. But anyways, why do you think they decided that so fast?
Yeah, I think that there were a couple of things. Number one, they were particularly in in critical moments of games when they needed the quarterback to come through. And there's just there's those 2 or 3 times a game where your quarterback just has to do it on his own or just make a play. And the good ones do it, and the others, or the sort of mediocre ones, don't. And consistently, Carson had difficulty in those moments. And I can think of some of the worst plays you saw last year, and they're highlights too, but some of the plays that kind of get replayed, the left-handed interception and such, right? Okay, they're bad plays, but worse off, they came at really critical moments. Right. And that was something I think that just really stuck with the Colts, and I remember their GM Chris Ballard saying, at the end of the season, this is a little bit separate issue, but that he had that infamous quote. He said, Carson needs to make the layups.
Yeah.
And what he's talking about is, Carson, check it down. Don't throw into double coverage, and I think, I could probably give the same advice to Matt Ryan right now in some regard. So I'm not saying they fixed it. All I'm saying is, we're talking about Carson, so this is what happened. And I just think, the other thing about Carson, and I hesitate to say this because sometimes it gets misunderstood, but I also think that he's not a natural dynamic leader.
Right.
Now, that is not a character flaw in someone, right? I think when you say it, people kind of want to interpret it that way. It's not. It's just who he is.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean he can't lead. It doesn't mean people don't like him.
Right.
I just think that this is a team that, over the last couple of years, they have had Phillip Rivers as their quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, who has had ups and downs as a player, but as a leader is off the charts.
Right.
Andrew Luck, same thing. And so, and Carson he's not in that sort of profile. And I think that was something that they kind of wished they had more of last year. So there's not one reason, honestly. It's a number of things, and they just decided to turn the page. And listen, they did it before they had any inkling that they could get Matt Ryan. So it was truly not even about Matt Ryan. They independently made that decision before Matt Ryan became available.
How many teams do you think were calling about Carson?
I don't think a ton. I really don't.
Is it more than one?
I'm not so sure there was more than one. Okay. And so, right, I know what you're getting at.
And I'm just curious,
they got pretty good value.
They got really good value, and
got really good value.
This team can move on after a year because financially, but you're still giving up a 2 and a 3 for that 1 year, and maybe not maybe only half a year. Who knows how many more? What happens the rest of the year? But that's what I'm just curious, because usually here, well, there were several other teams who were bidding against there, but it just seemed like it got to a place pretty fast. So
I think I would have to agree with that. I've never heard any specifics on Team X also being interested in Carson Wentz or talking to the Colts about a deal. Now, the backdrop is obviously there was a lot of quarterback movement, and I think that was certainly something that Ron took into account. There's no question.
They definitely did, and I know for a fact that they didn't want to be left at the altar because they had swung for Russell Wilson big and didn't get it, and so I think it's you got to get somebody, and so they were who's the next guy on your list that you want to get, and they went and got him. So and
I'll tell you, and I'll add this along the same lines. Look, for 2 weeks, the Colts sat there not knowing what their next move was going to be.
Right.
And I talked to some of those coaches, okay, and they weren't sleeping at night, okay? They were like, what are we going to do? I mean, our jobs are on the line, and that was a tough situation. Now, they felt a lot of relief when they got Matt Ryan, despite how that's turned out. And they felt like that was a great outcome. And I have to agree, at the time, it looked great. You can't predict the future, right? But I will say, I also understand why Ron Rivera would take that approach to some extent and criticize the move. I think there's a lot of room to criticize it. It's a lot of compensation. But I also, understand not wanting to be on the other side of the coin where the Colts were, which was, oh my God, we don't know what we're going to do.
They've been there for a couple of years. 2 more real quick on the defense, and then I want to get to Ursay, and then we'll wrap it up. So with the defense, where are they at? Because you can look at the stats and see what it is. but where are there is talent on that defense. They have they still can be a very good D. So what's going on with them?
I like the defense. They're playing well. They did not allow an offensive touchdown against Tennessee on Sunday, and so Tennessee did score a defensive touchdown. So there's that. But that's been just the latest of a handful of really, I think, impressive games. I mean, they did the best job against Patrick Mahomes of anybody, I think, this year, and it's just really frustrating him. He didn't play well, in to their credit, I guess, for his defense. he had a bad game. The Chiefs had a bad game overall, et cetera. But they really did frustrate him, and they did a really good job containing him too, which I think sometimes can be, where teams get in trouble against him. So they've had some ups and downs at times. Jacksonville in week 2, I can't explain what happened there, but they have slowly but surely definitely gotten on track, and I think their key guys are playing well. DeForest Buckner is really on the defensive line. He's the guy to watch. He's having a great year. Against the run, nose tackle Grover Stewart had just coming off a 12 tackle performance at nose tackle against Derrick Henry and the Titans. So I mean, that was just a really impressive day, and it'll be interesting to see if they get Kwity Paye back at defensive end. He's been, I think, their best edge rusher, and they're trying to get Yannick Ngakoue going, but he's in the fold as well. The other guy I would throw out there is Stephon Gilmore, who has the fountain of youth, 32 years old. This guy's playing really well. And finally, this could be the debut, I anticipate it will be the debut of Shaquille Leonard at middle linebacker. So that will be another element to watch for on defense.
Makes a big difference. Last thing, Jim Irsay's comments. What'd you make of them about Dan Snyder, obviously?
Didn't anticipate it. And I, after he got done, I texted somebody in the front office who was also at the meetings. Did you know this was coming? And I got in all caps, no. So anyway, I surprised at the moment, right? At the moment that I saw the comments, I was surprised. However, in retrospect, not necessarily. Like Jim Irsay has never been afraid to speak his mind. I think if you go back to recent history, go back to the summer of 2020 and the racial unrest and certainly the social justice protests, he was outspoken then. When it came to things like vaccination and the Colts, in fact, being a team that were lagging in vaccination rates, Jim Irsay stepped up and called a Zoom call with reporters and talked forcefully about the importance of vaccination and he went further than anybody else I've seen in the NFL, frankly. And so he has never been afraid to weigh in on sensitive topics. And I give him credit for that, because it's very easy for a billionaire to just sit in their ivory tower and just say, all right, well, just count my money. Why step in front of the firing squad? Why, who needs that? But he has always been willing to do it for better or worse. And certainly, the reporting from our colleagues, who have written about the Washington franchise and Daniel Snyder perhaps having ammunition and dirt on his fellow owners. Well, frankly, he doesn't care about that, Jim Irsay, because his has been out there. His demons are very, very public.
Got those skeletons, but his skeletons are not in the closet.
Right. And he's not hiding from it. In fact, he has taken his addiction issues, which are well documented, and to his credit, he's kind of spun it into something positive with the Kick the Stigma campaign, talking about mental health and addiction treatment and things of that nature. And so has been very outspoken on that topic. So look, love the guy or hate the guy, you can't deny that he's not afraid to say what needs to be said. And I think if I had to pick one owner who would have gone there, I probably would have picked him.
Last thing then, do you think he was representing, I don't know, maybe you don't know this, was he representing what other owners were saying in the room? Or do you think he was just being a maverick here?
I haven't been able to pin that down, but my instincts tell me that if he said that publicly to us, I can't imagine that he hasn't said something as forceful or more forceful in the room with his colleagues. It just seems unlikely to me, I don't think that, listen, I mean, Roger Goodell was asked about it, and asked was he upset about it. It didn't seem to bother him, and so frankly, I would be very surprised if he hasn't expressed similar sentiments, and he just was willing to say it publicly, I think. So, but we'll see. I mean, I would be very surprised if he has not expressed that privately as well.
Stephen, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday for not the Wentz-Ryan matchup. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the big quarterback showdown coming up. Looking forward to it.
There you go. Thank you.
You got it.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Stephen for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back on Friday with my keys to the Commanders-Colts game and a prediction. I'll talk to you next time.